Hey, what's up?
Yeah. Just a very simple question. Who is Esau and who is Jacob and who are their descendants?
Well, Esau's descendants are the Moabites, and Jacob's descendants are the Israelites.
Okay. Are you familiar with the Jewish perspective on this?
I think that Jews argue that eventually Edom stands for Rome and the Roman people, right? And Christianity by
Yeah.
extension.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you think that why would they get that perspective? And then why do Christians have a different perspective?
Well, they get that perspective from rabbinical traditions, which obviously don't accept the New Testament, right? So they don't see Christ as the Messiah. So, in their view, most of the prophecies that are in the major and minor prophets have to be pretty much restricted to an immediate grammatical historical sense. But oddly enough, even in the messianic text that Jews accept, there's future predictions about what the Messiah will bring. So I would argue that they apply an inconsistent hermeneutic because they will spiritualize a lot of these texts to refer to God's enemies or the enemies of Israel, but yet they castigate like the Christian interpretation for quote spiritualizing or giving a Christological context when they do the very same thing. So the fourfold sense of exegesis, pardes, which is in the rabbinical tradition, the Christians do the same thing. So they will do the same type of spiritual exegesis, but then they'll say no, Christianity is false because of all the spiritual exegesis, which is false. But they do the same type of exegesis.
Well, I'm just kind of asking because this seems to be a pretty important, pertinent question to the overall faith. Who has the covenant? Who doesn't? Right? Who has all these things? And both in the Old and New Testament, you do see passages related to how Esau is hated by God and how
Mm-hmm.
he's not well looked upon, right?
Yeah, and so do you think that the seed of Abraham are people who are biological descent, or do you think that it's a faith that's had? I mean,
Right.
is
Well, I mean, for example, you're talking about the Edomites, the Edom is one aspect of the descendants, but like, I don't know how they come up with how that has to do with Rome. Again, a lot of this is
right? So okay, so let me tell you how they do that. So the way that they come up with that is they go back to the table of nations and the genealogy charts, and they think they speculate about what people group went into what area, right? Like Put is the Egyptians, right? Javan.
Let's say from an Orthodox perspective, are those things real or are those things metaphorical?
I think that we should believe in a historical sense to the text of Genesis, but that doesn't mean that the rabbinical exegesis that there's no spiritual sense to these texts is true in the way that Jews do it. So, in other words, the speculation about the Table of Nations doesn't prove Judaism, huh?
But how do you know they're wrong?
Well, because most of these prophecies find their fulfillment in what Christ did. So that would negate the rabbinical exegesis as a whole. So, in other words, the messianic prophecies are the first proof I would go to. So, in other words, let me be really clear, and I'll let you speak. I'm not saying that the Table of Nations is wrong. I'm saying that the way that they said that Edom is Rome is they'll say, like, the descendants of Japheth went in this region, and those people are the people that ended up being Rome and Gentiles and Gentile Christianity, right? So that's what they'll say. I'm not saying that Genesis 10 is and the Table of Nations is wrong and we should quote spiritualize it. By spiritualizing doesn't mean not historical. In our view, the historical is the basis for any spiritualizing or allegorizing or Christological, typological interpretations, right? So we're not disagreeing on hermeneutics, but we're disagreeing on the interpretation of the text. So the way to disprove those arguments is principally just the question of did Christ fulfill the prophecies and the typology?
Right. So that's kind of the axiom on which you know what's right or wrong.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Well, just because it's just me asking this, it seems like this type of question isn't asked all that much. I don't hear much about this because, you know, when I look at it, it seems like this is pretty important, right? Who's on God's good side, I guess, right? If you want to look at it that way.
Sure.
So knowing those things and knowing who goes where, I think is pretty important, right?
Absolutely right. And I mean, we look at Acts 15 where this question comes up about how should Gentile converts be received into the church. And the church decides in Acts 15 that God wouldn't require anything more than what was required of Noah. So Acts 15 actually looks back to the Noahic covenant to say that since Christianity is true Israelite worship for the nations, that's our view of it. We're going to bring the Gentile converts in on the basis of what was expected in the Noahic covenant.
But here's where it kind of gets a little fuzzy between what is the real kind of biological, you said, right, and then what's the spiritual, because you're saying that, I just asking, so those who are Orthodox Christian are the descendants of Jacob. Is that what you're saying?
The faith of Jacob, by having the faith of Abraham, okay. Right? So
before being that, they were what, descendants of?
Well, hold on. So even in the Old Testament period, even in the time of the law, the prophets, even from the Jewish perspective, those people are all converts. I mean, Abraham is a convert, so he's the father of the faithful, not because of anything biological. So he is a convert, and every Jew recognizes that, right?
I assume so, right? He went from idolatry to
right.
Not, right?
Correct. And God called him out of Ur of Chaldea, so he was a Chaldean convert to the faith of the one true God. Likewise, we read of other people like Job, right, who had the faith, who were not of any biological descent. That was right. So the point is that God has accepted people prior to the Abrahamic covenant on the basis of their faith in God and living a holy life. So when the covenant was made with Abraham, just because there's a biological component to it, it doesn't mean that it never ceases, that it's always reduced to a biological component. So in other words, it's a both and, because people after Abraham converted during the Abrahamic and Mosaic covenant, there were people who converted to Judaism then, right?
Right.
So when Christ comes,
both and, not either or.
Correct. So when Christ comes, he ends up being the whole meaning of that biological element from our perspective, right? So when Christ comes, the biological component to why Israel was so important is fulfilled. It's not destroyed, it's fulfilled. And even still, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry.
Go ahead.
Well, I'm saying you're giving a good, I assume, Orthodox Christian perspective on this, but it's you can't not deny how the Jews have monopoly on this type of label. As in, if you go out and say, "Oh, Christians, this, the supersessionists." I'm not saying this is like right or wrong. I'm just saying from this perspective, this is very, highly looked upon in a good light. Right?
Well, I'm not understanding what your question is, because even Paul argues that the Jews had all kinds of blessings, but that wasn't enough.
But I'm saying in modern times, I'm talking about rabbinical Judaism, how they say they are, the descendants of Jacob. He's their, whatever, and we're Esau. That's what they say.
Okay, but so what?
That's perfectly fine for that to be said. That's perfectly fine for that to be whatever. But then, on the flip side, if a Christian says that, no, we're the real chosen and we have the faith, how far does that really get you?
I mean, you how far does it get me? Like, what is the pragmatic? How far?
You'd be banned. You'd be, you wouldn't have a YouTube channel. You wouldn't have any of these things if that was like, let's say, something that was focused on and talked about to a high level, high degree.
I mean, I do streams all the time talking about the fulfillment of the messianic prophecies, the fulfillment of the symbolism of the temple.
That's all perfectly, allowed. But I'm talking about that particular question: who is chosen, who is not? If this is this.
Okay, so hold on. Okay, so hold on. So what is the argument that you have? Because your bio says you're an anti-Abrahamic mindset, right?
Well, yeah, I think that if once we kind of start playing in these dialectical games, that's kind of seems, from my perspective, be already kind of pre-set up. Clearly, don't understand that this supersessionist, we know that the Vatican has completely disavowed this after Vatican II.
Yeah, I'm not a Roman Catholic. Not a Roman
I know
Catholic.
you're not Catholic, but I'm saying in mainstream Christianity, that's not a popular
Okay,
viewpoint.
do you have an argument against the Orthodox view, or do you have an argument at all? So I appreciate your questions, but I don't.
You're being fair. No, you're being fair with it. Saying that from an Orthodox perspective, this is how it is. But I'm just kind of looking at the totality of things, and the billions and billions of Christians that would say that what you're saying.
And there's not billions and billions of Christians.
Okay, you know what I'm saying. They would say that what you're saying is,
so
quote unquote.
What is it? That's a fallacy, right? That's a fallacy.
I guess so, but you're being honest. I'm just saying most Christians that you would come across would not be honest in that respect.
Okay, so again, how is that an argument at all about the truth or falsity of the Orthodox
what
Christianity?
you were going to respond to, so I was just asking that question.
Okay, but I just don't understand what your point is.
That they have a monopoly on, who gets to say what. And if you, as a Christian, come out, we have the chosen, spiritual, whatever, we're Jacobites, that would not be allowed, in any mainstream source. Like, where do you see the Pope saying that? Where do you see any of the...
But you keep bringing up the Pope. You keep bringing up the Pope. Well, how does that relate to what I'm talking about?
Well, I'm talking about how again, the totality of Christianity, there's more of those than there are of you.
So
I don't think that's...
I'm
not saying that's wrong. I'm just saying...
Okay, but I don't think that's Christianity. So, in other words, the Orthodox paradigm is going to determine what counts as Christianity. So, I don't care what the Vatican does. Like, that doesn't have anything to do with what I believe or what we believe. And so, the fact that Vatican II and Nostra Aetate says that...
what you believed at one point, right? That's what I'm saying. It went from one thing to another.
When did it go from one thing to...
Catholics used to say that their faith is the paradigm
I'm not a Roman Catholic. You're arguing against a Roman Catholic. I'm not a Roman Catholic. So what do you mean? What do you mean we said?
I don't see any.
What do you mean? You don't know what you're talking about. Again, that's not true. Where do we see what Orthodox council has ever said that Judaism is not superseded?
I don't know. I don't think there are many, because you're saying that
there aren't any.
That's fair. But I'm talking about what we see now in the totality of Christianity.
Okay, but I'm not part of the. You're calling it the totality of Christianity, and I'm saying that that's dependent upon one.
But you're trying to give apologetics. You're trying to, come to Orthodoxy.
Am I giving apologetics for the Vatican?
No, but those who are Catholic, those who are evangelical, Protestant, whatever, when they're led to believe what they're led to believe, and they hear from you. I'm just saying this is not something that's talked about enough.
Okay.
In my opinion.
Right, but that doesn't have anything to do with whether it's true or false or what's true or false.
Well, apparently you're saying that you're determining that, or the Orthodox or whatever.
No, you're saying, look, listen, you don't understand the fallacy in this. You're saying that, well, they say you're wrong. So what? What does a million people saying that I'm wrong have to do with whether what I'm saying is true or false? It has nothing to do with it. We could have...
That's fair. You can still be correct in something and still be silenced, deplatformed. You're off the plantation.
Again, what is that?
I'm not saying that you're a coward. I'm not saying that you don't say this because you're afraid of something or whatever. But I'm just saying, I see most of mainstream Christianity deathly afraid of talking about this subject because it's so compromised.
Okay.